Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. As we begin this week's assignment, the primary challenge for many readers is when we approach a biblical text is that we tend to read it through that lens. In other words, we sit down and we read, for example, with this week, the story of Abraham as well as the flood narrative. We tend to read it through that lens of Holy Scripture. So we need to kind of take a different approach to this. And what I'd like to do to kind of help that is to read from Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces. This is from the beginning of that work. Through the inhabited world, in all times and under every circumstance, the myths of man have flourished, and they have been the living inspiration of whatever else may have appeared out of the activities of the human body and mind. It would not be too much to say that myth is the secret opening through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos pour into human cultural manifestation. Religions, philosophies, arts, the social forms of primitive and historic man, prime discoveries in science and technology, the very dreams that blister sleep boil up from the basic magic ring of myth. Now, it's important to remember that when we read myths such as the flood narrative as well as the story of Abraham, we have to have the proper definition of myth in our minds, because otherwise we fall into the trap of using the definition of myth, which is all around us in contemporary society, contemporary culture, which is that myth, these are the falsities that we hold on to, such as the Loch Ness Monster or a Yeti or Bigfoot, right? Crop circles, UFOs. That we know these things are false, but yet we hold on to them, as like little urban legends, so forth and such on, right? That's not the definition of myth. So that's the first thing we have to remember when we approach these ancient texts, whether it's Gilgamesh, the Odyssey, the story of Abraham, narrative regarding Jesus of Nazareth, that with these texts from antiquity, this is prehistory. In other words, people didn't walk around recording things. Today, right, we record things with technology. We put it on YouTube or Wikipedia, right, all these different things. But people didn't, have technologies back then, even such things as books, right? So a lot of these narratives are really prehistory. So they relied upon the oral tradition. Now, a common occurrence in the oral tradition is the repetition of certain key terms that become thematic ideas through their recurrence and repetition. So I'll repeat that. A common occurrence in the oral tradition is the repetition of certain key terms that become thematic ideas through their recurrence and repetition. So the basic question to ask here is why? Why do we have this repetition? Because, you said it to me once, right? Well, we have to remember these stories were being told, right? And then retold. And as you might have noticed from something as simple as going to church, listening is really hard, right? A lot of people struggle in lecture classes because they just sit there and listen for an hour. And that's something that's a challenge to do. So if something is important, it's going to be repeated. So when you sit down and you read these myths, these ancient texts, you want to be on the listen, right? And that one thing that I encourage people to do is when you sit down with an ancient text, whether it's, the Odyssey or Gilgamesh or story of Abraham, sit down with it and then read it aloud and be on the listen for repeated terms. Now, what scholars call this, they call these stock phrases or leading words. And I like that idea, that term, leading words, better than stock phrases, because it lets us know that what the speaker is doing is that he or she is leading the audience to an understanding of theme. So I'll say that again. Leading words, that's the term that I like because it leads the audience to an understanding of theme. So as you're listening to the text, right, as you're reading through the text, be on the listen for repeated terms. And then once you isolate that, once you start to find those, right, repeated in the text, ask yourself, why is the speaker doing this? How does this contribute to the theme? What theme is the speaker leading me towards? That's one thing. Now, another thing, be on the lookout for dialogue, right? Dialogue in these ancient texts, especially in the story of Abraham and the flood narrative, is really important in developing character. Reason being, most of the time when we sit down to read in the 21st century, right? Say, example, we're sitting down and we're reading a novel. Character is developed primarily by the author, the narrator, going in and telling us things about the character. But in these epics, we don't have this happening. So what we have to do is we have to slow down and really pay close attention to dialogue. And the perfect example would be is to go back and reread again the dialogue between Abraham and God regarding God and his judgment on Sodom. What does this reveal about Abraham? How does this tell us about his character? What does this reveal about God's character, right? Because one of the characteristics for these epics is interaction between the epic hero and deities, or a deity. Like here with Abraham, story of Abraham, we just have the one God. So we need to look in here and uncover what's going on inside of this. There's more than just words, more than just the dialogue. Now, another thing we have to keep in mind with these epic heroes is that oftentimes when we hear the word hero, we think of valor, right? And always doing the right thing and being courageous, and that's true. But with Abraham, we see cunning and wit to a degree that many readers overlook the fact that, wow, did he really just do that? And that's in a holy book. Wow. What does that say about the idea of being a hero? And what does that mean to be an epic hero? Another thing to be on the lookout for is the depiction of women. The role that women played in antiquity is very different than the role that women play today. So be on the lookout for how Sarah and Hagar are depicted. Now, you'll notice that I'm not going in this lecture, I'm not spoon feeding, okay? When I teach, I don't spoon feed, and I don't want people just to regurgitate what I have spoon fed you back to me in a paper. So what we have here is things to be on the lookout for as you approach this text. So remember, even though this is part of Scripture and is regarded as holy for many people, right? Abraham is just one of the 1,000 heroes, right? The hero of 1,000 faces that Joseph Campbell is writing about, right? And this text, it's a myth, right? So we have to keep all this in proper framework to have that proper reading and understanding regarding the flood narrative and the story of Abraham. So, until we get together again, be well, do good work, and keep in touch.